Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Studies show you will be better off by delaying gratification. But if you continually delay gratification without ever consuming, will you ever be happy? How do you find the balance between happiness and meaning? And when does it make sense to start spending your hard-earned savings? And do you need to wait until retirement to use your money for your happiness? Not necessarily. Make sure you are saving enough for the future first, then figure out how to enjoy your life along the way. The key is finding comfort in making sound decisions today that will benefit you in the future, even if you can't predict the future. And now, on to our conversation.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hi, Aaron. How is it going today?
It's going pretty well. It's starting to warm up here in the Bay Area, so the weather feels pretty nice.
That's nice, and great to be here too. It's getting warmer as well. And thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, as well. Last week, we talked about the difference between happiness and meaning in life, kind of the difference between a happy life and a meaning life. And we got very philosophical. Lots of esoteric ideas and thoughts. And today, we're going to try to add some practical thoughts on top of that. So when it thinks about happy life versus meaningful life, how do you actually implement that in the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis? To give you an example of what we're thinking about, a while ago we talked about the marshmallow study, that if you see kids who put a marshmallow in front of them and say, I'm going to leave the room for 5 minutes, if you can wait to eat the marshmallow until I come back, you'll get 2 marshmallows. And this is a study that those who could delay their gratification had shown other success and happiness and meaning in life, that this was a trait that was very similar to just saving for retirement, that if you can show that you can save for retirement, if you can delay your gratification, things will be even better down the road. And again, because I have a philosophy degree and I tend to think about this, I tend to take this to the next step and kind of keep going down this thought process of, okay, so I come back in 5 minutes to give you 2 marshmallows. In real life, you could reinvest that. So what if you leave for 5 minutes again and I'll keep doubling your marshmallows? So go from 2 marshmallows to 4 marshmallows. Well, that's awesome. It's easy to wait 10 minutes. And okay, we go back 5 minutes, come back and go from 4 to 8. And like, wow, this compound growth is pretty strong and the time frame is pretty short. So this is pretty easy. But if you keep going down that path of keep delaying the gratification and waiting for the doubling of the marshmallows, but you never actually eat any of the marshmallows, you don't get any benefits from that delayed gratification. And today we want to kind of talk about that idea of when do you think about the meaning side and the things you know you're supposed to do, and when do you do the things that you are that make you happy? When do you choose to eat the marshmallows instead of delaying another time period and waiting even longer? So Tricia, what are your thoughts when we kind of try to get practical as it relates to the difference between happiness and meaning in life?
The notion that we discussed last week is perhaps there's this distribution where on one side, as you had mentioned, there's meaning, and on the other, there's happiness. And if you're too focused on happiness, then you may give up some meaning. And if you're only thinking about meaning long-term goals and things like that, we noted that happiness is more short-term and meaning is more long-term, then you may not really get to enjoy the happiness that meaning provides. And thinking about it that way, it seems like there might be this joining in the center of this distribution, a balance between meaning and happiness that might make sense for most people. So initially, that's my thought. And in terms of what provides that balance, I think it falls under a few buckets. I think there are a few things that clearly could be in the short-term happiness bucket, things that give you more instant gratification. And there are things that do provide that meaning, as we talked about, just saving, investing. But I think that the balance comes when you drive your life towards the notion that eventually you're going to have to use this money for things that make you happy. And realizing that early on, you can start to put into effect ideas that you don't have to wait till retirement to basically figure out. And, we did touch upon this when we dug into life planning. And the idea there is the goal of what we're trying to do is uncover, what do you really want to do with your money beyond just retire? What goals do you seek in your life? What would you regret not doing? And I think those types of targets become more important when you think about finding answers in this center of distribution, the meat of the distribution between meaning and happiness.
I like that
Now,
idea.
so some things that came up during that discussion of life planning is a lot of people tend to gravitate towards a few common themes. And these themes include spending time with family and developing close relationships and giving back to society and finding creative outlets for our time and becoming more affiliated spiritually with some goals there. So these high level themes are, I think, likely where it might make sense for individuals to think about if they're trying to maximize both happiness and meaning.
I like that. And it's a good reminder. The name of the podcast is the Mind Money Spectrum. And this spectrum idea has come up quite a bit. I also named my firm Greystone Advisor because I tend to also like the idea of thinking in the gray area, that things aren't black and white on the ends. They are in that middle area. So my first practical thought when it comes to the difference between delayed gratification and consumption is when clients ask about kind of budgeting or cash flow, or I'll have other advisors or media members ask me about budgeting. And I try to avoid using that word with clients because it tends to have this implicit meaning of restricting your spending. You're not allowed to do the thing that you want because you are confined by this budget. And I don't like that idea. I don't like that idea that we're putting controls or you don't get to make your own decisions kind of thing. But it is important to, at the very least, track how much you are spending and being aware of that. And for many of my clients, I tell, okay, if we know that you're saving enough for all your goals, and I can help you calculate that, including retirement and lifestyle, I kind of don't care what you spend the rest of your money on. If you prefer going out to eat over vacations, that's your choice. You get to make that choice. And if you prefer to spend more money on your nice car and less money on housing costs, I'm okay with that too. As long as you're kind of consciously making those choices, you understand the trade-offs that you're making. But as long as you're saving enough, then the rest of it will be, you get to live the life that you want to live. There's not going to be, oh, you only get to spend this much on coffee and this much going out to eat and this much shopping and this much on car and this much house. I've never liked that restrictive feeling, but prioritizing the saving is so much more important. And this is one of the things that I do mention quite a bit. And this is what we talked about originally, that savings rate. We're going to really focus on how much are you making, how much are you saving to reach those goals, and then we're going to have to worry about the rest. And that's how I tend to think about this balance between delayed gratification and current consumption. Is like, as long as you're saving enough, that's the priority. The delayed gratification is the priority. That's the first thing we do. The other part is secondary, but you get to choose how you want it. How does that kind of fit with what you have done in your own life and advice you've given to clients? Because I'm guessing that you do have a little more restrictions on your spending.
Well, there's a difference between myself and what I might recommend to clients, but those are nuances as well. There's nuances there. For example, with myself, we tend to track our expenses in buckets, and we do monitor it over time. And the idea there is just to get a rough picture of where the money is going, not to really restrict it, saying we've gone over this month or we can't do X, Y, and Z. I don't think we've restricted ourselves so much. More, it's just to figure out where is the money going, and it just provides insight. Sometimes it's just helpful to know that we're spending X% on food and beverage and Y% on groceries. And if we notice a shift, we might just think to ourselves, well, we could either go back, or if we like what we're doing with that type of spending, it's okay. It's just, data is helpful for understanding things like that. And what we do with ourselves and clients, though, is if we notice there's a break between, for example, the high level notion of not saving enough, what we might consider is just small things or low hanging fruit to move in the right direction. And often these changes don't need to be drastic. Often they can be slowly filtered in over time such that they're not necessarily noticeable. One thing we mentioned before is that as pay increases, instead of allocating that extra increase in income directly to spending, have the increases go more towards saving, therefore keeping lifestyle creep under control. Something as simple as that can be quite powerful over 5 or 10 years, because if your pay, doubles over that period, what that can mean is most of that extra increase can go towards retirement for two reasons. One, if you're catching up, meaning if you're kind of late to the game with getting your retirement bucket in order. Or two, if you're just interested in retiring sooner rather than later, things like that can help. Now, the reason I'm hedging with clients is because it also comes down to personal preference. Not every client wants to retire as soon as possible. And not every client is also open to making changes as quickly as other people, or, as myself. So understanding how receptive the client is to change and filtering that into the plan is also sensible. And the other thing to realize is some individuals are perfectly fine with lifestyle creep. It's something that they look forward to. So as we continue to say, there's no one solution. It kind of depends on the individual.
There are a couple things that you remind me of and almost make me want to change what I started off with. The life planning and lifestyle creep. And these are a little related. So when I mentioned if you're saving enough, I don't kind of care if you buy the new car. One of the observations I've made is you were talking about life planning and kind of the mentality of paying yourself first and that commitment to savings. I did realize that the people who are great savers, they don't buy the new expensive car anyways. They've internalized this mentality of, well, yeah, I need a car to get to work, but I don't need to overspend on the thing because I would rather devote the money to the important things such as retirement or other goals. So that is a pretty consistent observation, that those who are great savers don't spend the extra money on a car anyways. And the other one was that idea of life planning, and that has also come up. I also mentioned the idea of kind of shopping. If you like to go shopping, then as long as you're saving enough and you can spend that, then it's fine. But when it comes to life planning, it has helped clients realize that maybe those material purchases aren't actually making you happy. That they might, in the short term, the experience of buying the thing feels happy, but having the thing is just part of your baseline lifestyle, and it doesn't add any joy to your life. It doesn't add any happiness. And so that might be another thing that we do help clients with is it's not telling them not to spend money on the car or not to spend money going shopping. It's asking them, if we've taken care of the delayed gratification aspect, we've taken care of the savings, and now we're going to use the spending or consumption to make you happy, does that spending actually make you happy? And this is something that it's not always consistent. And a lot of people don't necessarily realize it. And that's another part of helping them. And this does get a little more on the practical side of, it's not just make sure you're saving enough, because that's a math problem that we help clients with of, if you are saving a certain amount and you're spending the rest, we can actually track of, okay, if you were to reduce your savings and increase your spending, then we're not going to be on track. But we can find that sweet spot in the middle of, okay, you're saving enough to support your growing lifestyle. And that's just a math problem. It's not necessarily an easy one, but it is very doable. But that idea of, once we figure out how much we're saving, then what you choose to spend your money on, is that making you happy? I think that's the next level of practical thoughts. And so I'm curious for you, are there things that you think about either for your own lifestyle or for advice to clients that you have chosen to spend the money on because you know you're saving enough, and knowing that you're spending that money will make you happy?
I think it's important to make that distinction that you made a couple of times, which is, in the end, it's up to the client to decide for themselves what they feel comfortable with and what they think makes sense for their individual lives. Meaning, if they want to buy a pound of candy a day and just guzzle it down, that's perfectly fine. It's something that somebody wants to do, and you're free to do that. We can certainly provide anecdotes, or I'm sure a physician might say that that's not the best, and we might say that's not the best either for happiness. But
because we know health is important.
Yeah, health is also important to your life plan, in addition to your finances. But beginning with personally, what I feel is, I get the feeling there are a lot of activities that we pursue that try to make us feel better, but may not necessarily provide the impact we're looking for. And the classic one that you raised, for example, is people like to stress shop, that they like to go out and buy something if they're feeling stressful, and it does help a little bit. But overall, it may not be the best, because it's also one of those things where you might need to spend more and more to reach that same level of happiness, that diminishing returns concept that's come up a few times. And also the notion that there may be other things that a client hasn't really considered in terms of what they could do as an alternative, such as volunteering or being outdoors more, or things that provide similar types of benefit at the surface, but also provide some meaning as well. So I think that's something to think about. Now, it's hard to be dogmatic or proselytize about these things. So it's something that might come up offhand, which is why, I'd emphasize there's a difference between what I personally think and the way I feel about certain things, and the way that I might convey it or put it forward to a client. Because with a client, again, it's their personal decision, and we're not here to be their disciplinarians. We're here to provide them helpful guidance in their lives and provide them insight that they might be looking for.
So what is something specific that you spend money on in your life that does kind of provide that happiness? You've achieved financial independence, you've saved enough, you've reached these goals. What do you choose to spend your money on?
Right. I'll put out a few things from that meaning happiness balance. So I always like improving my skills at things. So whether it's either picking up some new equipment for outdoor activities like snowboarding or scuba diving, those types of experiences, I feel like those are worthwhile. They can be pricey, but it's one of those things where it is an experience that I feel is kind of pretty neat. Going down a mountain on a plank, 50, 60 miles per hour is kind of cool. And also being underwater and seeing all those fish dart left and right and up and down, it's really a different world. It's kind of like you're in space when you're down there. So I feel like these types of experiences are worthwhile.
That does sound pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think there are even things that provide really short-term happiness that I don't mind. For example, I used to play video games when I was a real young kid. I had a Nintendo. And then I took a break for like 20 years.
We have to get back to the definition of a break if it's 20 years. It sounds like you stopped and then years later you started again.
That might be it. A very long sabbatical. And the reason I started again in university is I submitted my name for a raffle at a career fair and I won a PlayStation. A PlayStation 2. I don't really play, but I won it. So I played for like a bit. And then I stopped for another 15 years because I always thought I had something better to do until a few months ago when I finally picked up another Nintendo. This is the newer Nintendo. It's called the Switch. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Okay. I have heard of it. I have not played it.
It's one of those things where playing video games felt pretty low on my list for the last 30 or so years since I was an 8-year-old. And I just told myself, when I have enough time, I'm going to play a video game and really play it, not just play for an hour and then come back and, play for another hour and that's it. So yeah, it's one of those things that provided me with pretty instant gratification and I really enjoyed it. What I realized is video games have changed incredibly since Donkey Kong. And I think Hubert and Duck Hunt were my first games. But why not? It's one of those things where it's a really neat experience. It's really cool. It really doesn't cost that much. I've played quite a bit over the last month or two, and it's not really affecting my long-term goals. So yeah, there are things like that make a lot of sense. The other thing that's been happening lately for just happiness alone, we mentioned if you watch Netflix and videos and all the time, you could literally do that for 10 hours a day and not run out of material at this point.
Yeah.
Including a small slice of that into my weekly activities. I found there's a lot of incredible content at this point coming out that I can't even keep on top of, but it's there. So these are things where I feel like at present, there seems to be a renaissance with content where it comes to books and games and movies and music and TV shows and dramas and things like that, where I feel like why not have that be a part of an individual's lives as long as we're checking the boxes for the long term.
Yeah.
And then when I think about longer term meaning beyond just saving and retirement, I mentioned some of those life planning goals at the beginning of this conversation. And for myself, what I try to think about is there seem to be a bunch of traps where an individual might try to pursue things that they think will make them feel better, but may not exactly. And I try to avoid things like that. For example, we want to feel happiness or happier about our lives, more meaningful about our lives, we try to be prettier or wealthier or more powerful or look younger and things like that. I feel like notions like that are likely to not provide the type of benefit of feeling better in the long run. So I try to avoid those for myself. And I try to focus on more of the things that I think will provide longer term meaning and impact. And again, those are the things I mentioned earlier on the notion of family, friends, relationship, travel, spirituality, and giving back and helping the environment. So I think those might be the longer term meaningful bucket that I aim for.
Okay. So now I have a few questions for you as kind of follow-ups. Do you own your own snowboard?
I do. Well, it's 3 years old now.
Okay. So that was my question. Like, was it a newer, nice, expensive snowboard, or was it something used or really, really old?
So I bought it in 1997. So I got it at the end of the season, so it was on sale,
Yeah,
but it was new, and I think I got my money's worth. So,
definitely. What about
the,
your boots and your helmet and bindings?
right. So I bought the bindings I bought the bindings a year before in 96 and the boots in 96 and they actually lasted 20 years. What happened at the beginning of this snowboarding season is my boots literally lifted off of their bottom shell and the whole bottom sole came out of not one, but both at the same, within 2 minutes of each other. But no big deal. I went out on Craigslist and on my drive home, I found a pretty new pair of Burtons for about 35 bucks.
So it's you have no problem spending the money on like lift tickets, but you're still going really cheap on the boots.
Maybe. I mean, those Burtons are the high end for snowboarding equipment in general. So I guess they were about maybe $200 new, 2, 3, something like
Okay.
that. And this was just a situation where not many people were my size. This guy had my
Oh,
size.
I see.
And it happened to be their kids who had moved out and don't need them. And that's kind of it.
I have ski boots, and my story is not quite as drastic as yours, although I also have snowboard boots, and they also came off from the soles.
Right.
Shoe goo worked for a little bit.
Okay.
It's a specific like shoe design glue to attach back to it.
I was thinking about that.
So I have done repairs, but my bindings did not last that long. I also stopped snowboarding when my daughter started learning how to ski. So I wanted to learn how to ski at the same time as her. And I remember when Sports Authority was closing, they were going out of business. There was a Sports Authority kind of near my former office, it's less than a mile away, and it was one of my lunchtime walks. I really liked walking. There's a Target next door. I'd get some food for lunch, and I walked back. And there was one of my like healthy lifestyle decisions kind of thing. But I'd walk in, and they're going out of business, and so prices would kind of, oh, it's now 10% off. Now go back a week later, everything's 20% off. Go back a week later, everything's 30% off. And I remember this is the middle of summer, and they had, I think, 3 pairs of ski boots. And one of them actually happened to fit me. But they were $300. Like, I'm not going to spend that much on ski boots. And I kept going back every week until they got down to 60% off. Because like you said, there's only 3. It's middle of summer. They happen to have my size. So I spent $120 on my ski boots in the middle of summer 4 or 5 years ago whenever they went out of business, because I just couldn't bring myself to pay that sticker price or that full price for new ski boots.
Right.
My skis were hand-me-down from a friend, so I have no idea how old they are. So I got them for free from a very, very nice friend, because he does go skiing a lot more, and he got new skis for himself. And I bought poles off Amazon for basically the cheapest ones that I find that I felt would not break.
Right. Yeah. it's one of those things where you can spend a lot if you want to buy something new and you need it now and you want to go, mañana. But one of the high level rules of purchases is if you want to buy something that lasts more than a year, buy it off season.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to be buying, umbrellas in the summer, and you want to be buying winter clothes in the summer and swim stuff in the winter.
I do walk through. There's a local little ski shop. I walk through it every spring when they have their end of season closing sale. But I don't buy anything every spring. It's like I'm looking through, and maybe I need equipment for my kids, especially like, as my kids are growing. The idea of buying a helmet or like snow pants or jackets for one winter bothers me so much. But now that I have 3 kids, I kind of don't mind buying something that fits the oldest, knowing that the next 2 are going to grow into it.
Right.
And so but I do look for things like kids goggles, helmets, maybe jackets if I need the next size up. And it's that idea of I know where I'm going, but it doesn't mean I'm going to buy something just because I'm there.
Right. And on the flip side, with the scuba diving, we actually don't have much equipment, just whatever we can take in our luggage. We tend to travel light just because hauling all that around on a plane and checking it in and having extra bags and jacket just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So we just rent pretty much all that.
Okay. Another thing I did think that was related. You had mentioned the eating a pound of candy every day, and this is one of those things that it's easy to fall into the treats becoming normalized and becoming part of it every day. And this is not quite related to your video games, but it is one of those things that I try to be conscious of. I really like cookies, and I end up buying Girl Scout cookies every year, but that's part because they only come out this time of year and then they go away. And I try to make sure that I'm not eating cookies every day. But I saw a tweet from another advisor of things that make me 10% happier. My shorter commute to work, spending time outside with kids, and getting a donut on Sundays. And that idea of it's okay to do the unhealthy thing or the thing that costs money as a treat if you really can maintain it as a treat, if you understand kind of the moderation aspect. And that's where we get back to that middle gray area of the spectrum. And so that's one of the things I try to help clients look at, and as I've done in my own life, of yes, it's okay to spend money. It's okay to spend money in what might even be considered frivolous. It's not okay to spend money frivolously every day all the time. That treats are okay, but moderation is almost required for it to be a treat. Because if you don't use it in moderation, then it no longer becomes a treat. It's now part of your routine, and there's no longer the same joy associated with it.
Right. And it's similar to what we mentioned with the notion of stress shopping. It might be okay or it seems like you might have a better outcome if you buy something as a treat, meaning, oh, I've accomplished X, Y, and Z, therefore I'm going to buy Y, rather than I'm going to buy something every time I feel bad about X, Y, and Z not happening. It's just one of those psychological things where you're reinforcing a behavior. So in either case, but it might help if you reinforce the behavior that comes about because of something positive than negative.
That's interesting. So I've never heard the phrase stress shop.
I hadn't either until recently, but it's a thing.
It makes sense. I believe you, but I've never really experienced that in my life. If I had vices, they would tend to be related to like food and beer, not shopping. So that's just one of the parts of me that I don't get the same joy out of it. So like I can see others having that, but I've never heard of stress shopping. Like that makes sense, but I was curious, like where you read that or where you heard that.
It's anecdotally. I've heard it here and there.
Oh, okay. Okay. Other things that you brought up, that idea of like keeping up with or the falling into the traps of the things that you think will make you happy but don't really, and that the making more money, being more attractive, or something else like that. And here I think is another gray area to explore. And this might be a conversation for a different day. It also might be a conversation neither of us are qualified to have. But it's something I think about a lot because my older two children are girls. My oldest just turned 9, and my middle daughter is going to turn 7 in the next month or two. And I'm genuinely worried about body complexes and kind of attaching their self-worth to attractiveness. But at the same time, I want them to learn how to make good, healthy decisions. And so I think that's one of those, it feels related, but I can't quite figure out what the analogy would be. But that idea of it is important to make healthy decisions. It's important to exercise and not overeat, not eating a pound of candy every day. It is important for your own happiness and your self-worth. It also helps attract a mate, and having that companionship is one of the things that does make life happier and more enjoyable. But the obsession over it is dangerous and unhealthy. And trying to find that balance between making healthy decisions for the benefit of being healthy, not restricting certain things or making decisions for the purpose of vanity. Like I don't know if do you want to go down that thought? Do you want to have a guest host who maybe has been a teenage girl in their life? Or do you think about this, or is your daughter just too young?
Well, I do think about it when it comes to just things that are recently popping up with, for example, Disney in the princess notion and things like that. I don't actually like the concept of princesses in general. It just doesn't make sense to me. The idea is somebody's supposed to look up to me if I'm a little girl because I'm a princess, and that's my redeeming quality, that I was born to royalty. I don't know. It just doesn't fit right. The fact that this is why people should like me because I'm a princess. I feel like there's something kind of cringy about that I don't quite like. So I try to keep things like that as, a little bit of distance between that and my daughter. It's so hard, but just the idea that that's what somebody's happiness is supposed to be based off of, the fact that they've been born into a position where they're supposed to get things because of which family they ended up having parents as kings and queens. It just doesn't feel right in my mind. It doesn't set up the type of expectations that I think a child should have, particularly a young daughter. So I've struggled with how to actually deal with that, besides putting the princess books, farther back or higher up on the shelf for my 2.5-foot-old daughter.
2.5-year-old.
She's also 2.5 feet.
Oh,
higher up on the shelf.
I see. I like that. I like that way of phrasing it. That works out well.
Right. So what my concern is, you mentioned attaching yourself to things like that. And I think that might be the right phrase. The notion that there's a distinction between wanting something because it may provide you with some benefit versus attaching yourself to something and then pushing for something that the more you attach yourself to it, the more likely you are to get let down. It's that expectations notion. Because at the end of the day, we all get old, we all die, we all lose things that we try to hold on to. And the harder we hold, the higher expectations we have that they're not going to change, the more likely we will be let down.
I like that. That's a good observation. That, and this gets back to kind of what we talked about last week, though, on the philosophical side. That idea of it's okay to be ambitious and try to get promotions and raises, and it's okay to try to earn more money, and things in life become a little easier and it affords other opportunities. But it's dangerous to be keeping up with the Joneses. It's dangerous to pursue greater wealth for the sake of greater wealth. And maybe on the practical side, that idea of if you can internalize the idea of always moving forward, that self-education that you talked about is really, really valuable to your life. But you have to internalize it. You are improving your education to improve yourself, not because this will lead to a promotion or a raise that will get you more money that allows you to buy the bigger thing. And I think that's the hard part. It's almost like a mental health issue, but it probably applies across a lot of the things we've talked about. Eating a pound of candy every day is unhealthy, but there's probably some other reason why you're choosing to eat the pound of candy every day. And that idea of attaching yourself to something else, some other reason, it might be an effective incentive for the activity, but if you go too far and you're attaching kind of internal value or internal worth to that other thing, the odds of being disappointed are pretty high. And so if you make healthy decisions for the sake of making healthy decisions, that's a good thing. If you're making healthy decisions for the sake of being pretty unpopular and having other people jealous of you, that's probably not a healthy decision. If you're looking to increase your income to provide more for your family and live your desired lifestyle, that might be okay. But if you're doing it because you want to show off your wealth and increase your net worth and increase that number, probably not. So the motivations are very much a factor in this conversation, where the actions might look the same.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. It comes back to the motivations. And perhaps a way to think about it is when we mentioned last week the idea that it's the expectations that end up letting us down. And if our motivations lead to increased expectations, I feel like they'll more likely lead to the probability that you'll be let down. And as you had said with attachment, if your motivations lead to increased attachment to something, then it's also more likely that you'll eventually be let down. So I think that's something to consider. And as you alluded to, that's important for even short-term happiness motivations and even for longer-term meaning that you search for. If the meaning you search for is more likely tied to something that's going to increase attachment or expectations, I feel like those types of long-term goals, even though they fall into the meaning bucket, they're more likely to let somebody down. As you said, those long-term things of, wanting to be more powerful or wealthier or, prettier or smarter, they can also come to these types of concerns.
So maybe if we're trying to get very practical when it comes to meaning and happiness, that we talk about like meaning tends to be long-term, happiness tends to be short-term. But if you can develop the mentality that paying yourself first mentality, that your happiness comes from knowing you made the right decision today, that might be the balance between happiness and meaning. So the happiness is not from the buying the house that I want a few years down the road, because that's in the future. It's hard to know if you'll actually reach that goal. Life changes, you know what's going to happen. But if you made the right decision today and consciously thinking about that and like appreciating yourself for making the good decision, and you keep doing this every day and you keep making these good decisions every day, then you could experience that happiness. And this way you're not attaching your self-worth now to that future goal of like, I want to retire and do this. I want to have a net worth of $5 million. Well, if you never reach that, are you going to be disappointed in your life? But if you think of like, I need to save this much each day to reach this goal, I can kind of do the math. Here's how much I need based on rate of return. And the things I can control are the actions I make and how I derive my happiness. Then if I happen to reach that goal, great. And if things out of my control, markets go down, I don't get the rate of return I assume, then I don't reach that goal, I'm not as disappointed, because my goal was not net worth of $5 million. My goal was save this much each month, and then let's see what happens. And I have to use that number at the end to calculate the amount now. But if you make your goal and your happiness the thing in the moment, then you can both be on track for that long-term meaning. But like, yes, my goal is to save $1,000 a month. My goal is to save $2,000 a month. My goal is my goal is to save $100 a month. Whatever okay, I need to save this much to reach this goal. If I get to that little thing right now, that's the step to get on track.
I like that for two reasons. One, it's something we've heard before. Life is about the journey, not the end goal. And the journey happens today. It's not something that begins when you get there. Mm-hmm. And if you're always focused on the current day, you're a lot more in the present. You're not always thinking about something way off into the future. And it's the present where you actually live. So that kind of makes sense too, as the second point. So it sounds like you're onto something.
Okay, I think so. Yeah, I think that thinking about decisions on a daily basis and being happy with making the right decision. And a lot of the financial ones it's the how much you're saving, how much you're spending, and you kind of have to plan for the future, but not attach your validation to those future outcomes.
Right. The world will always change and shift, and you have to zig and zag. So in your mental picture, if you try to hold on to something too tight, you're just bound to be disappointed. But the second thing is, as humans, the great thing is we can zig and we can zag when things happen. We have this unlimited ability to constantly persevere when bad things happen. So there's no reason to hammer our happiness to some long-term goal with a golden spike and strive for it every day with the intention of telling ourselves if we don't reach it as we had planned, that everything's over, for two reasons. One, because things change, and two, because things change, we can change as well.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense in terms of finding that balance.
The way you talked about that, this might be something you can use with your daughter, something I've used with my kids, that from a very early age, like as soon as they could really understand their own actions and disappointments. The classic example of my 3-year-old drops his ice cream on the ground. He starts crying. And I'm like, no, you don't need to cry. We say, oh, well, and we move on.
Yeah.
And it's this idea like, while he does feel upset because he's 3 years old and it says ice cream, that oh well has worked so well with all 3 kids now that if there's a mild disappointment, they can say oh well and move on. But I had to teach them that. I had to teach them. I didn't get them new ice cream. It's like, no, that just didn't happen. Oh well. And
Yeah.
maybe you'll be more careful next time.
I like that.
So it's thinking about the feelings, but being able to move on and understanding that disappointments are part of life, and sometimes we can't fix the disappointments.
The notion is basically, no matter what happens, we're still alive and we can do something.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, why worry about what's going to happen? Wait till you get there and then do something.
Yeah. This is a good one. This is a good conversation today. I like this.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I'm also glad we kind of turned it back a bit to some more practical advice, and we got to also tie in some of our philosophical ramblings from last week.
I think we'll have to see if we just want to get even more practical, like the actual logistics of some things. But logistics is always so dry. Like you create a form or a checklist, and you just follow the checklist.
Yeah, I think a large part of what we've done and how this industry has evolved is that there are a lot of processes and workflows and steps and checkboxes for doing what we do. But I think it's in the softer areas where things get interesting, and it's conversations like these that help highlight that.
Great observation. I love that take. That was very insightful. Wow. So I think we'll end with that.
Sounds good. Thanks, Aaron.
Well, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Trishul. I really appreciate your time today.
Okay, thanks, Aaron, and have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.